silence in that room was the kind that pressed against your ears. I was 6 years old the morning my aunt showed up at our front door with 2 suitcases and a face I didn't recognize yet. Tight, rehearsed, the kind of face people wear when they've already decided something and just need you to stop asking questions. My grandmother stood behind me with one hand resting on my shoulder. I remember the weight of it. Steady. She didn't say a word while my aunt talked, she just kept her hand there. That was the last morning I lived with my parents. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because it's true, and because for a long time I didn't know how to say it at all. My parents had their reasons. That's what people told me. Neighbors, teachers, the woman at church who smelled like rosewater, and always patted my head a little too hard. Your parents have their reasons, sweetheart, as if reasons were the same as love, as if an explanation could tuck you in at night. My grandmother's name was Ruthie. Everyone called her that, not Ruth, not Mrs. anything, just Ruthie. And she had a small house in Asheville, North Carolina with a porch that creaked on the left side and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and something baking. She grew up with nothing, built everything herself, and never once talked about it like it made her special. That was just what you did, she'd say. You showed up. You kept going. She showed up for me. I grew up in that creaky little house. I learned to make biscuits on Saturday mornings and to balance a checkbook before I turned 14. My grandmother believed in practical things, not because she was cold, but because she loved me enough to prepare me. The world doesn't owe you softness, she'd tell me, but that doesn't mean you stop being soft yourself. I wrote that down once in a notebook I still have. My parents drifted in and out over the years. A birthday card here. A phone call that felt more like an obligation than affection. When I was 16, they moved to Phoenix for my father's work, or that's what they said. I stopped trying to decode the real reasons around that same time. My grandmother never spoke badly about them. She'd listen when I needed to vent, nod slowly, and then say something like, "People carry things we can't always see, baby. That doesn't make it your fault." I went to UNC Asheville on a partial scholarship and worked 20 hours a week at a coffee shop to cover the rest. My grandmother drove me to campus on the first day and helped me carry 2 boxes up 3 flights of stairs without complaining once, even though I knew her knees had been bothering her since the previous winter. She hugged me in the parking lot for a long time. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. I graduated with a degree in accounting, moved back to Asheville for 2 years, saved money, then took a job at a mid-size firm in Charlotte. My grandmother and I talked every Sunday. Sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 20 minutes. She told me about the garden, about her neighbor's new dog, about the book club she joined at the library, even though she thought half the members picked books that were, in her words, just plain miserable for no good reason. I laughed every single Sunday. Then the calls started getting shorter. She didn't tell me right away. That was my grandmother. She'd carry something quietly for weeks before she let you see it, because she didn't want to worry anyone unnecessarily. When she finally told me it was her heart, she said it the same way she'd say the weather was turning. Doctors want me to slow down a little. Nothing dramatic. But I heard something underneath it. I drove to Asheville that weekend and sat with her on the porch. The boards creaking under us, and I made her tell me everything. Congestive heart failure. Managed, but serious. I started driving up every other weekend after that. I helped her organize her paperwork, go through the house, handle the things she'd been putting off. She was sharper than anyone I knew. She'd had a financial advisor for years, had her will and trust already in order, everything documented clearly. She was that kind of woman. She didn't leave things to chance. What she did leave to me, eventually, formally, in writing, was everything. The house in Asheville, a rental property she owned in Black Mountain, a portfolio of investments she'd built quietly over 40 years, and a sealed envelope with my name written on it in her handwriting, left with her attorney with instructions that it be opened only at the reading of the will. She passed on a Tuesday in March. Quietly, at home, the way she'd always said she wanted. I got the call at 7 in the morning. I was already dressed for work. I sat down on my kitchen floor in Charlotte and didn't move for a while. I don't know how long. The coffee maker beeped, and I didn't get up. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn, and I remember thinking it was strange that the world just kept doing its ordinary things. The funeral was held at a small Methodist church she'd attended for 30 years. People came from all over: her book club, her neighbors, former coworkers, people I'd never met who shook my hand and said things about her that made me cry in that good, complicated way. The way you cry when you realize someone was even larger than you knew. The preacher called her a woman of quiet dignity. I thought that was exactly right. My parents came to the funeral. I hadn't seen them in person in 4 years. My mother looked older, which sounds obvious but still caught me off guard. My father stood slightly behind her, the way he always did in uncomfortable situations, letting her take the lead. They hugged me. My mother cried. I stood there and let it happen and didn't know what to feel. So I felt nothing and just kept shaking hands and saying thank you and accepting the little foil-wrapped plates of food people pressed into my arms. They didn't mention the will that day. The attorney's office scheduled the reading for 2 weeks after the funeral. My grandmother's attorney was a woman named, well, I'll just call her the attorney, because what matters isn't her name. What matters is that she was professional and calm, and had clearly dealt with complicated family situations before. Because she barely blinked at what happened next. My parents showed up. I hadn't expected that. I should have, maybe. But I hadn't. They came in together, my father in a collared shirt that looked newly pressed. My mother with her hands folded in her lap the moment she sat down, the posture of someone bracing for something. They'd brought their own attorney, a man I'd never seen before who set a leather portfolio on the table and nodded at me in that measured way lawyers do when they're trying to be neutral and not quite succeeding. I looked at my parents and I thought, you weren't there. You weren't there for any of it. The biscuits, the checkbook, the Sunday calls, the drives back and forth, the porch, the paperwork, the last 2 years. You weren't there. I didn't say it out loud. The attorney read through the will, the house, the rental property, the investment portfolio, my name on all of it. My father's attorney cleared his throat. The claim they filed was that my grandmother had not been of sound mind in her final years, that she had been unduly influenced by me, her caregiver, and that the distribution of assets was therefore invalid. They wanted the estate reconsidered, split equally among surviving family members, which, in their interpretation, included them. I want to be careful here about how I describe what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't rage exactly. It was something quieter and colder than rage. It was the feeling of watching someone reach into the most sacred thing you have, the love of the one person who never left, and try to put a price on it. Try to argue it didn't count. Try to say it should be divided up like a pie at a table they'd never once sat at. I said, very calmly, okay. The attorney looked at me. Open the envelope, I said. She'd mentioned it at the start of the meeting. The sealed envelope my grandmother had left in her care. My parents' attorney had already objected to its inclusion, called it irregular. But my grandmother had been meticulous. The envelope was notarized, witnessed, and accompanied by documentation from her doctor confirming her cognitive clarity at the time it was written. It was legally sound. The attorney opened it. My grandmother had written 3 pages. The attorney read them aloud. My grandmother had known. That was the thing that broke me open, sitting in that office. She had known. Not specifically, not that there would be a legal claim, but she had known her son well enough to anticipate something like this. She wrote about it plainly, without bitterness. She wrote that she loved him, that she'd spent years hoping he would be different, that she understood people were shaped by their damage, and she forgave him for his. But she also wrote, just as plainly, that she had watched me grow from a frightened 6-year-old into a woman she was proud of. That I had shown up for her in every way a person can show up for another person, and that her decision was not made under any influence except her own will and her own eyes. She wrote, I have watched my granddaughter become someone I hoped I would be. She doesn't know her own worth yet. I hope one day she does. She also wrote that she had already discussed the matter with her attorney and her financial advisor, that the investment portfolio had been formally transferred into a trust in my name 18 months prior, before her health declined significantly, making any claim against it essentially moot. The house and rental property had similarly been structured. Everything had been done carefully, deliberately over time. She had not done it in secret. She had done it quietly, because she was Ruthie, and that was how she did things. My father's attorney was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned over and said something to my father in a low voice. My father looked at me. Not at his attorney. Not at the table. At me. I don't know what he was looking for. I don't know if he found it. My mother had started crying somewhere around the second page of the letter. She was crying still. I noticed she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her hands. The claim was dropped. Not that day. There were a few weeks of back and forth, letters from attorneys. One phone call from my father that I let go to voicemail. But it was dropped. There was nothing to pursue. My grandmother had seen to that. I want to tell you what I did after. I drove back to Asheville. I parked in front of the house and sat in the car for a few minutes before I went inside. The porch still creaked on the left side. The kitchen still smelled faintly of coffee even though no one had been there for weeks. I walked through the room slowly, touching things. The edge of the kitchen counter, the back of her reading chair, the windowsill in the bedroom where she kept a small ceramic bird she'd had since before I was born. I made coffee. I sat at the table. I opened the book she'd had sitting out, her book club book, a bookmark about 2/3 of the way through, which meant she hadn't finished it, and that fact hit me in a way I didn't expect. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything. I just sat there in her house for a while. In the quiet, my parents have not been in contact since the claim was dropped. I haven't reached out either. I've thought about it, not because I want to repair something that was never really built, but because I keep hearing my grandmother's voice in the back of my head. People carry things we can't always see. I don't know what I'll do with that yet. Some doors you leave cracked, not open. Not closed, just cracked in case someone on the other side finally decides to knock. The rental property in Black Mountain is generating income. I've been fixing up the Asheville house gradually. I repaired the porch, finally. Though I left the left side alone. I didn't want it to stop creaking. It would feel like losing something. I still make biscuits on Saturday mornings. I still keep a notebook, and I still hear her, sometimes in the ordinary moments, standing at the kitchen window, walking across a parking lot, getting into the car on a Tuesday morning to drive to a job I worked hard for. The world doesn't owe you softness. But that doesn't mean you stop being soft yourself. She prepared me for everything, it turns out, even this, especially this. I've thought a lot about what actually happened, not just in that attorney's office but in the decades that led up to it, and the more I sit with it, the more I believe that most of what unfolds in a person's life is less about luck and more about the quiet accumulation of choices, small ones, daily ones, the kind nobody photographs or applauds. My grandmother made her choices every single day. She chose to get up and make coffee and keep the porch light on. She chose to drive me to campus with bad knees and not say a word about it. She chose, 18 months before she died, to sit down with her attorney and make sure that everything she'd build would be protected, not out of spite, not out of strategy, but because she understood something I was still learning. That love without structure is just a feeling, and feelings don't hold up in a room full of lawyers. My parents made their choices too. That's the part I had to stop flinching away from. They didn't just fail to show up once. They made that choice over and over again, across years. And then one day they walked into a room expecting to collect something from a life they had no hand in building. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's the clearest example I've ever seen of how actions, or the absence of them, compound over time the way interest does. Eventually, the account comes due. What I keep coming back to, though, is this. I didn't win because I was strategic. I didn't win because I was angry enough or smart enough or prepared enough. I won because my grandmother was wise, and because she had spent a lifetime developing the kind of intelligence that doesn't come from a degree. The intelligence of paying attention, of planning quietly, of understanding that the people who love you deserve to be protected from the people who don't. That's what I want to carry forward. Not the outcome, but the way she approached her whole life. She didn't wait for things to be fair. She didn't waste energy on bitterness. She just kept building, kept documenting, kept showing up. And she raised me to do the same. I think about the notebook I kept in college, the one where I wrote down things she said. I still have it. The pages are soft at the edges now, and I think the truest thing I can say is this. The person I became. The one who could sit in that attorney's office and say, okay, open the envelope without shaking. That person was built in her kitchen, on her porch. In the ordinary, unremarkable years that nobody would have filmed or celebrated. Intensity isn't a single moment. It's what you practice when nobody's watching, until the day you need it, and it's already there. She knew that. She lived it. And she left it to me more surely than she left me the house or the investments or the sealed letter with my name on it. The porch still creaks on the left side. I left it that way on purpose. Some things you keep exactly as they are, because losing them would cost more than fixing them ever could.